So we want to welcome everybody, want to welcome all our Torah Anytime viewers. So tonight we're learning to Leilu Nishmat, to Shmaria Yosef Chaim ben Yaakov Yisrael, as well as Leilu Nishmas Esther Bela Basaev, Avram ben Chaim Yehuda, Yecheskel ben Avraham, and also to Rav Chaim Pinchas ben Yaakov Yitzchak. This is Rav Scheinberg. My Rosh Yeshiva, his 10th yahrzeit was yesterday. We're also learning L'Refuah Shlema to Liat Gittel Bas Chana and to Zechariah Shimon ben Cyril. Okay, so let us get started. So I really want to go and to...
Rabbi?
Yeah.
The name I sent you also, if you could?
Yeah, I said that. Liat Gittel Bas Chana, right?
Oh, sorry, I did not hear it.
Yeah, no problem, yeah. So really what I wanted to do is I wanted to start off where we left off. We were speaking last week on the idea of Emunas Chachamim. And I really want to pick off on this and continue from this. And the goal of what I would love to do is to accomplish 6 lessons that we could get from Rav Chaim's life and story. So we'll see hopefully what we are able to get to, but that really is the goal. But I really want to focus on Emunas Chachamim to start off with. And I feel this is a very, very important concept, because you have a lot of Gedolim stories, and you have a lot of these situations where people go and get brachos, and maybe they don't always see it come into fruition. They don't always see the results that they want to. So they start coming up with different types of excuses, different types of answers of what is the reason that they weren't answered. And I really want to focus on this aspect, the power of Emunas Chachamim. So just as a quick recap, a very, very short recap, what we spoke about last week was the idea of Emunas Chachamim is like you have a tzaddik, a gadol, that goes and gives you a bracha. Now obviously that has tremendous amount of weight, but that's not the only way that blessing will come to fruition. There's another part of that equation. And that other part is the amount that you have that emunah, that belief, that faith that this tzaddik, what his blessings come to fruition, and his whatever he says will be, will come, whatever the blessings is. So there's an aspect from the tzaddik side, from the righteous person side, and then there is an aspect from your side. So what are you going to do? Are you going to be like, oh, okay, very nice, and then let me continue with my life as is? Or are you going to change your mentality now that the righteous man said, oh, you're not going to be sick anymore, or you're going to be very wealthy, or whatever the blessing was? How do you take that to heart? Do you take it to heart, or do you go and do you say, okay, that was a nice thing, but it doesn't really change your life in any sense? Now, the bigger aspect, and this is what we spoke about last week, that a big part of the way that the blessing gets fulfilled is the amount that you have belief in that tzaddik, in the power of the blessing. So the more, and you think about it like this, I was actually thinking about it, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God gives us everything that we are, I shouldn't say we are worthy of, that he decreed for us. And if we want to get more than was decreed, so we obviously have to do something on our part. And this is the way that tshuva works. So the way that tshuva works is that you have, God forbid, someone's having something bad happening to them. So now they go and they do tshuva, they repent. Now what happens is when they repent, or even if they don't repent, they take upon something else. They do something more. They improve themselves in any way. All of a sudden, they're not the same person that was the decree earlier. So meaning that the decree was for, Yankele to have X, Y, and Z. Now Yankele over here, he went and he did tshuva, or he did a bunch of extra good deeds, whatever it was. So now he is no longer the same person that the decree was originally decreed for. He's now different. He changed, he grew, he became something else. So now the decree doesn't always stand. And sometimes there's additional blessing that comes to it. So when you go to a righteous person, and the righteous person goes and gives you a blessing, that in itself, is very powerful. But the aspect that I can't say is equally as powerful or more powerful, because I don't know, but is very powerful as well, is the aspect of, now what are you going to do to change? So one aspect of that change is having Emunas Chachamim. There's a mitzvah. It's a positive thing when you believe in tzaddikim. So this is the aspect that I want to continue with. Now, there was once a person that was getting married, and he didn't have enough money for a house, for an apartment. This is in Israel, this happened. He didn't have enough money for an apartment. So he goes over to Rabbi Kanievsky. And he goes and he says, can you give me a bracha? Can you give me a blessing that I may be able to find an apartment, be able to work on the money situation? So Reb Chaim goes to him and it says, what is the maximum amount of resources that you could pull together for an apartment? So the guy thinks for a second and he says, $40,000. So he says, okay. He says, I want you to call the real estate agent and I want you to tell them to look for you for an apartment for $40,000. So he goes over to the rabbi. He says, Rabbi, with all due respect, $40,000 is I won't be able to buy, anything. I mean, this is what he was thinking. He couldn't even say that. It's the gadol was telling him. He's like, $40,000, you can't buy a shed. You can't buy a door to a shed in, Bnei Brak. Bnei Brak's a high, it's expensive over there. Small apartments go for a lot of money. But the gadol Adar told him something. So, okay, fine, you got to listen. So he calls up a real estate agent. And he says, I'm looking for an apartment. So he says, okay, what's your budget? What's your price range? So he takes a deep breath and he's like, $40,000. So the real estate agent says, I'm sorry, what? Let me just compare. Imagine somebody's, I'm assuming most people here live in Brooklyn and that area, tri-state area. Imagine you're in real estate and be like, okay, I want to buy a house, a 4-bedroom house, 3 bathrooms, X amount of square footage, and I want to spend $40,000. You'd be like, $40,000 is what costs a parking lot, a parking spot in Brooklyn. What are you going to get with $40,000? So he calls up the real estate agent and he says, yeah, I want to buy a house in Bnei Brak, a very expensive, real estate market, for $40,000. So the guy starts saying, he's like, are you, really? Do you know the market? What's, words can't even come out. So he says, before you go and mumble jumble, he says, I went to Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim told me this is what I should ask for, $40,000. So the guy says, okay, you don't argue with Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim Kanievsky said something. He said, fine, $40,000. A week later, 1 week later, this guy gets a phone call from the real estate agent. He says, you're not going to believe this. He says, there is a guy who is sick. He's older on in his years, and he has kidney failure. And he needs to buy a dialysis machine. The problem is he can't afford a dialysis machine. So he called me up and he says this is what he's looking for. He says he wants somebody to come and buy him a dialysis machine, which costs $40,000. He has a 4-bedroom home in Bnei Brak. He will let the person that buys him this machine live in 2 of those bedrooms, and he'll live in the other 2. And then, after he passes away, he doesn't have any children, doesn't have any heirs. The person that does this, he will inherit the entire apartment. So the guy's like, okay, done. He takes his $40,000. He buys a dialysis machine, and he ships it to the guy. They sign all the documents, all the paperwork. A week before the wedding, the guy unfortunately passes away. He passes away and he inherits the entire apartment. It's a 4-bedroom apartment in Bnei Brak he inherits. And not only that, he takes the money from he had a dialysis machine that was rarely used. He takes that dialysis machine and he was able to sell it for almost $40,000. He was able to get a 4-bedroom apartment and $40,000 of that he spent, back. So he spent everything for dollars. For what? Because a gadol said that. Now imagine we take that scenario. How many people would have been like, okay, let me call a real estate agent and be like, there's no way. We wouldn't even begin to think about that it even has a possibility. But somebody with emunas chachamim, somebody who has this faith in the rabbis, has the ability to be like, you know what, if this is what the rabbi says, that this is what I'm going to do. And that in itself is the Yeshua, that in itself is the salvation, the fact that he went and he listened. Let me share with you another story. Don't you love stories? Isn't it amazing? Time flies when you say stories. So there was a couple that were expecting a baby. And they were very excited, very happy for the baby. However, and unfortunately, their happiness was short-lived. When they came in to do the ultrasound, the doctor told them that there is a problem over here. There is a lack of amniotic fluid. And he says because of that, the baby's lungs haven't developed. Now they're just 2 rocks in his chest, or her chest. The baby is not able to get any oxygen. The only way that he's getting oxygen now is because he has the umbilical cord. But once you take the baby out and the cord gets cut, the baby's going to die. And he says furthermore, because there's no amniotic fluid over there, we can't even see the baby. And even if he is able to somehow live, he'll probably be deformed, missing limbs, having difficulties with mobility. And furthermore, he's being crushed in the womb. There's no amniotic fluid. So even if he does have his limbs, his arms and his legs will be permanently stay crushed. The baby basically won't survive, is what the doctors were telling this couple. The pregnancy is going to end one way or another. So, like they were distraught. They got shot down. Like, how could you, all this great news that you're pregnant and you're going to have a baby, and all of a sudden what happens is that, everything gets shot down. They had to go to do a bunch of other tests, and they scheduled all these other tests. But before they went to this test, they said, listen, the husband goes and says, let me at least go to Rabbi Kanievsky, the Gadol Hadar. Let me get a bracha. So he calls his rabbi, and they decide they're going to go together. They go together. On the way there, the rabbi tells him, he says, if Rabbi Chaim tells you to do something, you have to take it, you have to accept it upon yourself. He was like preparing him for things that Rabbi Chaim might say. So he says, yeah, of course, whatever it is I can do to save the baby. Excuse me. So they go to Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, and Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky listens to the whole story. He didn't give any bracha. He goes, and instead he goes and he says, don't listen to the doctors. Everything is going to be okay. Don't go for any more tests, and go daven, go pray. So the boy went and looked at the rabbi and says, maybe is there something that I should take up on myself? Anything in particular? So he says, just pray as much as you can. Just pray. Just daven. Just as a side thing, I once asked Rabbi Chaim also that, and he also gave me a similar answer. Just daven. And Rabbi Chaim goes and says, everything is going to be okay. So he goes over to his wife when he comes back. Very happy news. He says, everything's going to be okay. And he goes over to his wife and tells her the great news. And the wife's like, that's amazing, but like, go back to what you said about not doing any more tests. Like, what does that mean? Like, we have to do tests. And he's like, no, Rabbi Chaim says don't do any more tests. And from the wife's side, her father was a doctor. Her entire family is in the medical field. He's just like, what do you mean don't do any tests? We have to do that. Hishtadlis, we have to do our effort. We have to do it. That. Yeah, and furthermore, she goes and she says, Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky spoke to you for 5 minutes. Maybe he didn't understand. He's not really a doctor. And she's going back and forth, and all of a sudden she stopped herself. She says, wait a minute. She's like, this is what the Gadol Hadar says. She says, let me work on my emunas chachamim. Let me work on the faith that I have on the sages. And she decided that she's going to listen. She's going to hold herself back and not going to go to any more doctors. And she's the one who's saying over the story. She says at 26 weeks, she was hospitalized for a few weeks, for about 6 weeks. At 32 weeks, she went into labor. And as they prepared her for labor, they also prepared her for the birth and death of her child. They're like, there's no way that this baby is surviving. The surgery, she goes, was very quick. And after the surgery, after they took out the baby, there was this harrowing, this deafening, this very, very difficult just silence. There's like no noise. And I looked at my husband, we looked at each other in despair, like sort of we gave up. And all of a sudden, we heard it. There was a tiny little cry of a newborn. But the problem was we couldn't see that. There were so many doctors that were huddled around the baby that we couldn't even see what was going on. So my husband went, he jumped up with his phone, he went and he took some pictures, or he took a picture, and ran back to together with his wife, and they started looking at the picture. And what did they see there? Lo and behold, it was a baby. It was a baby. And not only, they zoomed in, they pinched and then zoomed in, and they counted like 10 fingers on each, 10 fingers, 10 toes, they had everything. At 6 weeks old, he had to stay in the hospital for a little bit. At 6 weeks old, he had his bris, and Rav Chaim Kanievsky was a sandik. When she was saying over the story, this baby was 3 years old, a regular toddler, having fun and trouble the way that toddlers should do. We don't realize the power of a gadol. Where all medical doctors went and predicted the worst, and a gadol went against them. And that's what came to fruition. That's what happened. That's how the story ended. The story, and how many times, wow, look at that. There's a comment here, we know that someone knows this family. And they met the healthy baby. I don't know how long ago this story was. And that baby is my husband. I don't know, whatever it was. But look at that. Isn't that's beautiful. That's amazing. So we see over here the power of a gadol, the power of a bracha. Rav Chaim Kanievsky writes in Orchos Yesher that there's different levels of Ruach HaKodesh. And at this point, I have to really give another shout out to my brother-in-law, Rabbi Chaim, that I gave a shout out for last week, because I spent another, well over an hour on the phone with him when it was like 1 a.m. in the morning by him. And we went over, different stories and different ideas, and he really, gave me a lot of information that I didn't know. So I want to give a big shout out to my brother-in-law, Rabbi Chaim from Yerushalayim. And this is one of the things that he mentioned. In Archas Yosher, there is 7 levels of Ruach HaKodesh, that Rabbi Chaim says. The lowest level is that if someone's going and giving you advice, that you trust someone to give advice, Hashem puts in their mind the right things to say. So you go to a rabbi, you go to a mentor, you go to someone for advice, there's a little bit of Ruach HaKodesh that goes to that person, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because you go and you're trusting that person, you need help, that person has a little bit of Siyata Dishmaya, a little bit of Ruach HaKodesh, so to speak, that puts in the right things to say. Obviously, the holier the person, and so on and so forth, we're not going to get into all the details in it, but obviously that has a prerequisite. You can't just go to Father John and be like, okay, I'm asking you for advice, so it must be because I ask anybody for advice. Obviously, we're talking about somebody that's on a higher level. But in any case, we see over here the power of Emunas Chachamim, the power of when a gadol says something, you take it. Now, I want to share with you something, what happens when someone doesn't take it. So there was a general in the army that was accused of a very, very serious crime. And if he would be found guilty, he would be stripped of his rank. And not only that, he would have a very, very long prison sentence. So he tried everything that he could. As a last resort, he decided he's going to Rabbi Kanievsky. He goes over to Rabbi Kanievsky. And Rabbi Chaim listens to his entire story, and he goes over to him and he says, I promise you that if you do tshuva and become observant, you will be found completely innocent. So the general, was not religious. He was shocked. He's like, the case is going to be starting very, very soon. He says, I can't change my lifestyle in just a few days. So Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky says, just start with keeping Shabbos. Just start with keeping Shabbos. So the general, having no other option, no other choice, he said, fine, I'm going to keep Shabbos. And he started keeping Shabbos. And they came into the first, court meeting, and they saw that, to the shock of everybody, is that the judge was listening carefully to both sides, but he was obviously very, very partial to the defendant. He was like everything, like he had some sort of like affinity towards this general, and everything they said, they sort of like he listened to it, but it sort of be dismissed. And as the court case moved on, and they went to, one court case, and then, they took a break, and it was a few days later, or a few weeks later, I don't know how long it was, there was the next court case. By the third court case, there was, it seemed that this general is going to be let scot-free. Like, there was nothing that was sticking. So this general started thinking, he says, maybe I've been too hasty, maybe I ran too much in promising to change my lifestyle. I mean, obviously, look at it. Everything is going great. Like, did I really need to change my lifestyle? Reminds me of that famous story where you have some guy who's going looking for a parking spot. He's late for a meeting, he's in Manhattan, he needs a parking spot, he can't get to any of the lots, there's nothing going. So he goes over to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and he says, listen, God, he says, if you find me a parking spot, I promise I am going to start learning better, I'm going to start keeping Shabbos, I am going to start putting tefillin. He's listing off his things, so this is a huge business deal. And as he's listing off his things, there's a parking spot that opens right in front of him. And he slides in right into the parking spot. He's like, God, listen, don't worry about it. I took care of it on my own. As if all of a sudden, everything was on his own. So the same thing, this guy, everything was going great. And he was like, you know what? Did I really need to start keeping Shabbos? So he decided that the following Shabbos, he's reneging on his promise and he's going back to not keeping Shabbos. He went and he stopped keeping Shabbos, that final Shabbos. And to his dismay, he went and there was a next court case the following week. He confidently entered in there thinking, that's it, I am going to get, exonerated. There's not going to be any issue, not a problem at all. To his shock, there was an entire change of attitude. The judge, the jury, everybody just switched like 180 degrees. They reviewed the case against him and found him guilty on all charges, and they ended up sentencing him to the maximum punishment. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that like unbelievable? But you know what? That's like, okay, well, if Rabbi Chaim told me to do something, of course I'd listen to it. But let's take it a step down. How many times do we give ourselves our excuses? It wasn't the reason that I spoke Lashon Hara and that's why X, Y, and Z happened. It wasn't the reason that I was doing this and that's why. We give ourselves all these excuses and say, you know what? It just so happened to be that I found that parking spot. And like I guess you could say the best excuse, the best example that I could give is we have someone who's not religious and says, oh, me and God, we have an understanding. Yeah, don't worry about it. We have an understanding. This guy also thought that he had an understanding with God. He's like, listen, I kept Shabbos, everything was going good. Why do I really need to keep Shabbos? It's not really Shabbos, it's just a coincidence. It just happened to be the same point in time. How many times do we say that about ourselves? We start fixing ourselves. Life gets a little better, but then we start to be like, it's not because of that. And you start getting lax, and you start, falling in what you wanted to grow in and have been growing in. How important it is that if we take upon ourselves something, to make sure that we stick through it. We don't know the blessings that come out of it. You don't want to go and have this reminder. May we take this as a lesson. And this is lesson number 1. Lesson number 1 is the lesson of Emunas Chachamim. But a part 2 of that lesson, besides the fact that we listen to Chachamim, that when we take upon ourselves something, let's try to stick through it. Yes, we might fall. Yes, we might mess up. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't just get back up again and continue whatever it is that you are working on. After the Petira, after the Stipler, which was Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky's father, passed away, Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky started giving a shir in Talmud Yerushalmi. But it's not like a regular shir. He gave like a very, very sophisticated, high-level shir to like these, Talmidei Chacham and these people that were really on a high level of learning. And he gave it throughout the entire year of mourning, the entire year after his father passed away. But after the year, he ended it. And they asked him, why did you end it? He's like, this was an unbelievable shir. So he says he didn't have the time. He didn't have the time to prepare. So they asked him, says, how much, this is Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, who knows Kol Torah Kula, like by heart. They're like, how much time does it take you to prepare for the shir? And he goes and he says about 5 minutes. And let's just pause that for a second. Talmud Yerushalmi is not the regular Gemara that most people learn. Most people learning Gemara, they're learning Talmud Bavli. Like when they finish that, they usually go to Talmud Yerushalmi. So this was more difficult, more advanced learning that people do. And he would already give a more advanced, sophisticated level of shir to a very high level of people in learning. And how long did it take him to prepare? 5 minutes. But even that, he said, I don't have any time. But they were like, wait, but we don't understand. He says, you sit over here and you answer hundreds of letters a week to people. You sit much more than 5 minutes. People come and they ask you questions. You sit with them for hours that you have time for. So he goes and he says, for people that come and they write for me and they ask me questions, he says, I have an obligation, I have an achrayus to answer. He says, they're writing letters, they're asking something, so I have to answer. He says, and sometimes people go and they ask me a question that it's a very simple answer. Like sometimes people will ask him a question, he would say, oh, look at Mishnah Berurah, and exactly where the location is. He would answer very briefly. But he would answer. Why? He says, because even though it's a simple question, maybe people need, a little bit of chizuk. They got a letter from whatever it is, they needed to have a little bit of attention. So Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, he didn't have time. But he made time for certain things. And one of the most important things in his life, besides obviously learning nonstop, was Klal Yisrael. How much time somebody who's machshev time so much goes and stops everything to go and listen to somebody go and complain about something or ask for a bracha. You know how many times I went to him when it wasn't the time when people are going into him. That he wasn't a whole line of people. Like I went to him while he was in the middle of his learning time, learning Seder. And he would go, he would stop, listen to it. Obviously, it would be a short, very quick, but whatever it was, he would stop what he's doing and give the bracha. And give the, the buha, the bracha, the tzlacha, whatever it was. The amount of avas Yisrael that Reb Chaim had was unbelievable. But I want to try to focus on this, on the chesed aspect, on how much he cared for other people, how much he had this desire to help other people, even though he had no time. Rav Shlomo Kanievsky, Rav Chaim's son, he said that he and his father would take walks. And he would take walks with all the boys. And he would speak to them in learning. And along the way, what happens if someone saw Rav Chaim Kanievsky? They would run and they would stop and they would ask questions. And they would speak to him in learning. And his son noticed that Rav Chaim answered differently to every person that they asked. And one time he commented, he explained to his son, he said there's various types of people. There's different types of people. Some people come to you and they want your agreement. Other people want an argument. Some people are genuinely looking for clarity. Some people just enjoy learning Torah. And they want to speak and learning. And Rav Chaim went on to list 5 different types of categories of people. And Rav Chaim goes and explains to his son, he says, you have to learn to understand people. He says, there's some person that needs this type of attention, and there's a different type of person that needs this type of attention. This is somebody that wasn't learning psychology and be like, okay, let's try to analyze. This is a gadol that spent his entire free time and non-free time learning Torah. But yet, when somebody would come and ask him a question, he would look at that person, he would analyze that person, and try to cater his response, or whatever it is, to whatever that type of personality of that person. Obviously, as it got older and as became very busy, he had to shorten it to make more time for people. So that's why he came up with the bua and the bracha b'atzlacha. But he had this patience and understanding of what each person wants. There was once an American boy that came over to Rabbi Chaim with a long list of questions, a megillah of questions, and Rabbi Chaim holds his hand with warmth and love, and he listens to all the boy's questions, and he answers his questions, every question. When the boy left, Rav Chaim goes and says in the name of the Chazon Ish, he says that every boy, needs to receive a certain dose of honor, respect, every single day. And he says, really, this self-esteem exercise is really not my job. It's a job of the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the schools that these boys are learning. But sometimes they don't do the best jobs, and they come to me. And that's why I'm here to go and try to boost their self-esteem. And this is where he went. And he sat with a boy, which asked a whole list of questions. And he went and he said every single answer. And now if you realize how much learning he had to do, just the Gemara was 8 pages of Gemara. People do Daf Yomi, takes him about an hour a day. That's 1 page. He would do 8 pages of Gemara, and that's just Bavli. That's not talking about the Yerushalmi, the Tosefta, the Sifri, the Zohar. That's not even close. You have this whole long list, and this is something that I found fascinating, because what happens if I have a lot to prepare? And somebody goes and wants to speak to me, and I'm like, I can't, I have so much to do. I have like so much, I can't, I possibly no time. I try to make time, I would go back and forth on it. But when I hear like Rabbi Chaim had the longest list of like requirements, he was the busiest person alive. Like, he slept 2.5 hours a night. He's busier than the President of the United States of America. He's busier than a college student cramming in for their college exam the next day. The final, the exam that's going to pass them for their boards. And they study nonstop, and they're on Adderall and 5-hour energy and Red Bull and everything else combined, and possibly other things that maybe are more illegal. Rabbi Chaim was busier than all of them. Yet when somebody came over to him, he stopped and he gave them that attention. Gave them that bracha. How many times are we rushing and somebody goes and asks you for something, and all you want to do is be like, I'm sorry, I have no time now, call me back later. Or your child comes into you and be like, I'm sorry, Abba has to do, Abba has to run again. Like, no. Like, a lesson that we can learn from this is that when you have an opportunity to do Chesed, stop for a second. Just stop for 1 second. And you might not be able to do it the level that Rabbi Chaim did it, but at least give the person in front of you at least a second. Just take a deep breath, and instead of going like, I can't, like the Energizer Bunny, I just can't stop. Give them at least a second. A second you can give. Take a deep breath and listen to them for a second. Okay, maybe a second is too small. Maybe do 5 seconds. But whatever it is, a few seconds. Look at the difference that it's going to be. First of all, your entire way of presenting yourself is going to, the second that you're very agitated, you can't hear. But you'll be like, you know what, I'll give this guy a minute, 2 minutes, 5 seconds, whatever it is that you decide. All of a sudden, you're more relaxed. You're able to concentrate. You're able to listen to that person. You're able to help that person. When the stipler of Chaim's father, before he was nifter, he had some health issues, and he decided towards the end of his life that he doesn't want doctors to come to his house. He doesn't want doctors to come to his house. So Rav Shach, another gadol, went over and tried to go and say, like, let's try to get doctors to come. We can't lose the stipler. We got to make sure that he's sticking around as long as possible. So he goes over. At this point in time, Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky's sister was living with the stipler and taking care of him. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that she was an almana. She wasn't married at this point. So she goes over. They go over to the sister and says, maybe you can go and convince your father to go and see doctors. And she went and she weighed both possibilities, and she decided, I'm sticking to whatever my father decided. Whatever my father's decided, that's what I'm respecting. So they still tried to go and push it. They went to Rabbi Chaim. They said to Rabbi Chaim, go speak to your father. Let him go see the doctors. Let him go and try to, for whatever the cheshbon was that the zt'l had, we're not going to get into it, but he had a cheshbon for what he was doing. But he went over to Rabbi Chaim and said, go speak to your father. And Rabbi Chaim said, listen, he says, my sister is taking care of my father. He says, my sister's in charge, I'm not in. If my sister said that she's signing with her father, then I'm signing with my sister who's signing with her father. He would not go, why? Because he had a sensitivity to his sister. His sister is spending there for years taking care of her father. I'm going to go and I'm going to start telling her what to do? He says, this is what she's doing. She has a responsibility. This is what she took upon herself. She is now the one in charge. And now, to show you the sensitivity, when the zt'l was nifter, Rav Chaim's inheritance was the zt'l's Sfarim. At that point, the zt'l wrote a lot of Sfarim, and he didn't sell the Sfarim in stores. It was only sold in his house. So if somebody wanted to buy a sefer, they had to go to the zt'l's house and buy and physically go there and buy the sefer. So he gave his inheritance to Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim for this would have been a tremendous amount of financial, ease. Like here he would have just parnasa coming in, people come buying in this farm. But what happened is that his sister was taking care of Reb Chaim. The zt'l. And when his father passed away, he says, I'm not taking my inheritance, I'm leaving it with my sister, who was living at that point in the zt'l, his father's house. And they went over to Rav Steinman, another gadol, and they said, why is the zt'l doing this? And the Rav Steinman went and responded that, his sister was an almana at this time. She didn't have her husband. She was living alone. And at this point, until now, she was taking care of her father. So she always had guests. She always had visitors coming to see the Rav, the zt'l. She was always busy. Now that her father passed away, what is she going to do? She's not going to be busy anymore. Now everybody's going to go to Reb Chaim to go and buy this farm. So Reb Chaim Kanievsky decided, out of the sensitivity to his sister, that he's not taking his inheritance. Now people go and they fight over their inheritance, and they go and they go to court with their inheritance. The zt'l says, I am not doing. Why? Out of the sensitivity to my sister. My sister is going to feel upset and sad. She's going to be bored. Maybe she's not going to have people. Now she's going to have visitors. She's going to have visitors. People need to go and buy this farm. So people are going to go and visit her. He says because of that, he didn't want to take his inheritance. Look at the sensitivity that Rav Chaim had. This was his income. This was going to be his income, but he gave it all up. Rav Chaim used to make a siyum every Erev Pesach. And a siyum an entire, entire everything. So, excuse me. So he, one particular year, there was an orphan that came, and he was a bachar, and he would have had to fast Erev Pesach, but he said, I didn't finish any mesechta to make a siyum. So Reb Chaim goes to this orphan, to this yasam, he says, don't worry about it. He says, you'll join me in my siyum that I make, Erev Pesach. Now, it's Erev Pesach. There's hundreds of people that come to Reb Chaim siyum. I mean, there is Reb Chaim, makes the siyum, and there's wine that's made over. There's a bracha on the wine. That wine is then taken and split into a bunch of different wines, and each bottle of wine it gets sold or gets given. And if you give a certain amount of donation, people go crazy over the siyum. I remember one year I was able to get a bottle of wine. That part of that wine was spilled, and I remember I was taking that wine, and probably for a year I would spill a little bit in my kiddush cup. And I would make kiddush on the part of the wine that Rabbi Kanievsky went and made a siyum on. If I would have thought properly, I probably wouldn't have opened that bottle. I probably would have just kept it closed and just, I don't know, I kept it for who knows what, never open it. But anyways, I opened it, I drank it. It was part of the kiddush for about a year. But in any case, so there's hundreds of people that are coming to the siyum. This is the famous siyum. And Rav Chaim is about to start the siyum. Gadol dar, hundreds of people waiting, but he's not starting, he's looking in the crowd. What is he looking for? He's looking for that orphan. Here you have a gadol adar. You'd be like, okay, fine, so many things that you could say. But what happened? He was looking for an orphan and he didn't start the siyum until he found that orphan. And he brought him up close, and only then did he start making the siyum. The Chazal tell us that when Eli was Eli was cursed that all his children will die young. And the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, page 18b, goes and says that Rabba and Abaya, they came from descendants from Eli. And they were also subject to the curse to die young, 18 years old, like very young. But however, Rabba, he was, because he was constantly learning Torah, he lived until 40 years old. But the koach of the Torah, he was able to live longer than and partially avoid that curse. Abaya, on the other hand, he was learning Torah, but he was also involved in acts of kindness, in acts of chesed. And he lived for 60 years old. So you had somebody, you had Rabba who learned, and because of the koach Torah, he lived to 40 years old. But you had Abaya who had both Torah and chesed, he lived until he was 60 years old. When somebody has Torah and chesed, his Torah is on a higher level. Now, I'm not saying that Rabba didn't have, chesed. He was a gadol adar. I'm sure he had chesed. But there's something about Abaya, I guess, that he went out of his way to do extra chesed. If somebody goes and learns a lot, but he doesn't have the chesed, his Torah is not worth the amount. That's not machshav in Shemayim. We tend to forget sometimes how important chesed is. How sometimes we go and act so rudely and lack, I don't want to give examples because it's not nice, but I'm saying like we run to go learn, and in the course of our running to learn, we hurt other people. We go and we try to go and gain, but we don't realize that sometimes we lose more than we gain. And when you think about chesed, there's a very famous saying that chesed starts at home. If Chaim goes and says that when a person gets up to Shemayim, and they get up over there, you can have a lot of Torah, you can have, Shemayim, heaven is not going to be impressed with your if let's say you did everything, you did chesed, you did Torah, says Rabbi Kanievsky, they're not going to be impressed in Shemayim with your chesed if you didn't do chesed at home. If you went and you forgot your own family, and only then you did chesed, then really what you're doing is maybe you're running for kavod. Maybe you're running for other things. Chesed starts at home. It's very easy to do chesed to be nice outside the house. But when the doors close and you start screaming and yelling and have anger issues, that's who you really are. When you think about chesed can be either very easy or very hard. If you go up and you wake up tomorrow morning and you say, you know what, I'm going to do one chesed today. That's all one chesed I'm doing. So that means that now you have a mission. Today's mission is going to do one chesed. So the next opportunity that a chesed comes, you're going to jump in it because you want to just check off that thing that you have to do chesed. Have to add it to that app, the idea that we discussed a while back. Do one chesed a day. If you go and you try to do one chesed a day, then you're going to look for it. If you're going to look for it, it's going to be easier. You're going to want, somebody's going to collect in charity. Be like, wait a minute, this is chesed, stuck. Let me go and do this. So you have a desire to do it. But if you're not looking for it, if it's not something that you want to do, if it's not something that you're aspiring to do, so when it comes your way, you're going to look at it as something like, oh, I'm not interested. But if you strive to do it, if you desire to do it, all of a sudden it becomes easier. So some people say, oh, you know what, I have a hard time doing chesed. Yeah, if you change your mindset, if you go and you decide, you know what, I want to do one chesed, all of a sudden it's going to be easier because you're going to try to find something. Imagine you can't go to sleep until you do one chesed. You're going to have to find it. So you're going to be looking for the entire day. You're going to jump on every opportunity that it comes to with you. Such an important aspect. When we want to do something, you tell yourself in the beginning of the day, I'm going to make one good bracha today. Okay, fine, I make plenty of brachas every day, and I make it. But just one bracha, I'm going to say with super duper kavanah. I'm going to concentrate. I'm going to be like a Rebbe, lighting Hanukkah candles. I'm going to go over there and I'm going to say the bracha with every single letter, every single syllable emphasized the right way. I'm going to have the right thought. Just one bracha a day. That's it. Just one. You should be making at least 100 brachas a day. But just one bracha. Think about it. Just one bracha I'm going to make with concentration. Just think about that aspect. Okay, fine. So maybe it'll be your first one. But when we think, another idea for the app, one bracha a day. We have to write this down. Okay. But in any case, the idea where you can decide if something's going to be difficult for you or something's going to be easier for you, it's all in the state of mind. And take this a step further. I want to speak a little bit about Rav Chaim and his wife, the Shalom Bayis. So, there was a whole question and answer that was asked to the daughter of Rav Chaim, and she answered these questions, and I plugged in a bunch of different stories that I found together with this. But Rav Chaim, he would go and he would make sure he would give so much honor to his wife that when he came home for lunch to eat the meal from, when he was in between his learning, his wife, set him up the meal, but he would never start his meal without her. If she was busy caring for something else, caring for others, somebody came to the door and she was busy with something, he had his shtender, he went and he sat and he learned until she was ready to eat, and only then did he start eating. He didn't wait, and growing up, this, on the Shabbos table, this is when, my mother always told us, and we were never allowed to start a course until my father ate. We couldn't. And we knew growing up, and I keep on trying to remember to teach this to my children, but I tend to forget about it. But it's such this is what I was imbued with, that we would never start a course until my father took the first bite. We had to wait. We couldn't. There was never my mother had to tell us a few times. Obviously, we were kids and we tend to forget it, and sometimes eventually it came to the point where my mother just gave us a look and we knew, don't touch the fork, put it down until my father starts, and then we start. Whether it was the fish, whether it was a soup, whether it was a chicken, nobody started their meal until my father took the first bite. Now I'm thinking about it. Now when we go visit, my parents, I have to think about it. I'm pretty sure I still do it, but I don't know. I have to think about it. Now, before it was so ingrained in me that I didn't even think about it. That is the level that when we strive to do something, you want to honor your spouse, it should come to a point where you're not even thinking about it. That's how it comes. Reb Chaim, he sat with his wife, he wouldn't even start the meal unless she did. It happens same thing with the afternoon rest. In Israel, people take naps in the afternoon, especially if you're up late, you're early. So you take a small nap in the afternoon. Rab Chaim would never take an afternoon rest unless she also laid down. If she laid down, then fine, he would lay down. Again, how many times did he actually lay down? I don't know. He literally lived on 2.5 hours of sleep a night. But in any case, he wouldn't go to sleep unless she was sleeping. Every year in the summer, they would, in the Bein Hazmanim, between the semesters, I guess if you could call it, in the yeshiva, him and his wife would travel together to Tzfas. And Reb Chaim would say he's doing it for his wife, so she could have a vacation, because she was also always very busy with the people, the community. And his wife says she's doing it for Reb Chaim, so that he would have a vacation for the people and the community. And one year, they came back from his vacation. Again, his vacation wasn't that he was sitting on the beach, sipping a tequila or sipping a pina colada, watching the waves. And on his vacation, he also sat and learned, 21.5 hours a day, or that's what he did on his vacation, and regular time. But they go and they ask him, so, how was your vacation? I think one of the children asked him, how's the vacation? He was like, it was unbelievable. I was able to write so many chidushim, so much different, for his farm. I was able to write so much. So they go to him and says, if you were able to accomplish so much, if I'm not mistaken, I believe one year he was able to finish a whole sefer on his vacation. What do people do on their vacation? I can't do the daf yomi because I gotta go see the rainforest. I gotta go do the jeep tours. I don't have time for that. Reb Chaim on his vacation would finish writing a sefer, different level, right? So the children go to him, so if you were accomplishing so much, why don't you spend another week in Tzfas? So Rabbi Chaim dismissed Isas Gadol. He goes and he says the only true consideration is the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What Hashem wants from me, says Rabbi Chaim, is to be here in Bnei Brak and make myself available to His beloved children by sharing their joys and sorrows and answering their questions. And he goes and he says, my own needs are secondary to that. His focus was what was Klal Yisrael. Even though he would have been able to write more Sfarim, he would be able to write more, but his focus was for Klal Yisrael. Chesed was such a big aspect in his life. His daughter says that one time her mother fell ill, became sick, and she remained in bed. She remained in bed. So Reb Chaim couldn't do anything, but what he did was that he took his shtender, and instead of learning in his regular place, he went and he sat next to the bed, his wife's, when she was sick and laying in bed, and that's where he went and he learned next to his wife in case she needed anything. So he sat next to his wife the entire time, sitting and learning in case she would need something. Furthermore, you think of these stories, like, this is the Gadol Adar who had zero time. You think, like, I'm so busy, like, L'havdil alfei alef avdalas. I didn't want to say Biden because no one knows where Biden is. Biden doesn't know where Biden is. But, like, how many times does Trump and whatever his wife's name, it's some Melania, Malaria, whatever her name is, like, how many times did they go and they sit together and eat the meal together? Like, and again, I'm not bashing Trump. He was great for Israel. Like, if he runs again, maybe it'll be good. Who knows? Everything's been a shemaim anyways. But when you think about the most busiest person, can you imagine that the busiest person, President of the United States of America, excluding this year because he's checked out already, but generally, right, the President of the United States of America, no time, zero time, always running from like place to place, sits with his wife when she's sick. Like, it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing with somebody who has no time what he has time for. Furthermore, the daughter goes and says that whenever her mother would leave outside of Bnei Brak, her father asked his wife, he said, the Rav Chaim asked the Rebbitzin, says, tell me when you're leaving. And when she says, I'm leaving, he would go and he would escort her outside the house, 4 amos, about 8 feet, he would walk her out, and he would remain in place until the car that she was traveling with vanished in sight. He waited until she left. Imagine that. Imagine the next time that your spouse leaves to work, you go and you stand on the porch and you do like a little queen wave, like until you see the car go by. Like, first of all, the spouse is gonna be like, is everything okay? Like, what's going on? You're like, okay, what'd you do? How much did you spend? Like, no, for Rabbi Chaim, this was a normal situation. This is how much he respected his wife. His wife knitted a sweater for Rav Chaim. The Rebbitzin knitted a sweater, and he wore it for many years. And whenever it wore out, he asked his children to fix it. Because he goes over to his children and says, the sweater which mom, whatever, mother, whatever you want to say, knit for me, warms me like none other. Says this is the only sweater. He went and he cared so much about what his wife did. Knit one sweater, wore it all the time. There was once a woman that asked to be allowed in the merit in preparing food for Rabbi Kanievsky. She's like, and Rabbi Chaim says, no, I'm sorry. I only like the food that's cooked by my wife. And like, first of all, the mother, and this is the daughter saying, says, my mother was very pleased by this. But Rabbi Chaim, food, like, how he ate? He would look at the food, so he would know which bracha he would eat. He would have to make. But by the time he finished, he went back to learning. He goes over to people sitting there and he says, what did I eat? What bracha achrona do I need to make? Like, his mind was always in learning. The stories that we said last week where you had, like a gadol drinking shmata water and thought that's what soup is. Gedolim don't care about food. So what does Rabbi Chaim says? No, I like the way that your mother, what would, he was giving honor and respect to his wife. So the next time that your wife or spouse burns your food, you say, so delicious. I love it when it's so crunchy and I could taste the coals. It's like delicious. One time, one of his grandchildren got engaged and they brought the kala to a Shabbos Suda by Rav Chaim's house. So when they came in, Rav Chaim started singing, singing the songs for Chazan Kala. And then a few minutes go by and he starts singing the song again. So one of his children goes to him and says, Saba, you sang the song already. Why are you singing it again? So Rabbi Kanievsky goes and he says, the first time I sang it, Safta wasn't here. He says, now she came back, she was in the kitchen. I want her to enjoy also the singing of the song. So I sang it again for Safta, for grandma, for Rabbi Kanievsky. It's very easy to be nice to people outside your house. Where it tells you about the person if you're nice to the people inside your house. You're nice to your spouse, you're nice to your children. Chesed begins at home. When they asked one of his children, Rabbi Kanievsky, they asked him, they said, isn't it hard that your father is so removed from, how do you have a father that's a gadol dar? For the children. Okay, we see obviously he had a good relationship with his wife, better relationship than anybody could ever dream of, but the children, he was learning nonstop, seeing people how is it having such a father? So he goes, the son goes and says, you're making a mistake. Our father never neglected us. He said, he always played also games with us. He played different games with us. He didn't play catch, so to speak. But he goes and says, want to know what our favorite game was as growing up? Is that our father would come to us and he would ask us to mention any name of any Rav, any Gadol. It could be a Tana, an Amora, someone from the Mishnah, someone from the Gemara, a Rishon or an Achron, any Gadol, and he would tell us a story about that Gadol. Anyone, you pick the most obscure Gadol, and the game was that you have to try to get Rav Chaim to not be able to say a story about that person. If he's able to say a story, he says a story about it, and we enjoy. But if he doesn't, then we win. And he goes over and he says, we never won once. But we also won every single time, because we love the stories. It was great stories. Apparently he was a great storyteller. And furthermore, there was another game that he played with his children. And the game was that there was a sefer that came out that was called Mechol Amarim Hapis Comment. It's an encyclopedic work that has thousands upon thousands of mamari Chazal, of statements of Chazal, and they're organized alphabetically, and they're noted where they're located in Gemara, Zohar, Chumash, Nach, anywhere, whatever it was located. The game is that we would go through this encyclopedic work, and we would find a statement that no one ever heard of, and we would ask the Rabbi Kanievsky where it's located. And the game was to try to get him to not be able to find a location. And this is by heart, by the way. And he didn't go and sit and review that, encyclopedic work. And he says that also, we never won once either. Rav Chaim any statement, Rav Chaim was able to pinpoint exactly where it was located in Gemara, in Nach, in Chumash, in Bavli, Yerushalmi, Zayar, Sefra, Sifri, any of the Midrashim, anywhere. And he, the son goes and says, he was very devoted to us. He would spend time with us. He would learn with us. And furthermore, even the grandchildren he would spend time with. And he would, if he would ever have to travel, he always used to go to Brisson to be the sandik, and he would travel for it. And if he would travel to some sort of town that he had a grandson that was learning on the way or nearby, he would go out of his way to go and stop by the yeshiva to visit his grandson. And he would go and he would sit and he would talk to the grandson, and he would ask the rebbitzin to prepare a little pekala, some food so that he could bring to the grandson, and he would go and say, what are you studying, what are you learning here, and he would sit and spend time with his grandchildren, spend time with his children. This is somebody with, again, lahavdil, alfei dollars. When was the last time that Trump, played golf with his son? I forgot his son's name. I don't know. Or whatever it was. If you think about it, someone who's so busy, you tend not to have time. But here, you have a gadol dar that somehow accomplished so much of learning, yet he had time for everybody that came to his door. He had time for his children. He had time for his wife. He had time for everybody. It's sort of his time expanded for him. How do you have so much time? And I believe one reason, out of many reasons I can't say, is that he was looking for this time. Possibly, again, this is my own thought on it. That he was looking, and when you're looking for something, you find it. He wanted to spend time. When you want to do something, you find the time to do it. You have the ability to do it. What an amazing lesson that we could learn. We say the most common excuse that we give ourselves, our rabbis, our mentors, our spouses: we don't have time. I wish I could start, learning and teaching the public, and, I wish that I could support orphans. I wish that I could spend time with I have no time. There's nothing to do time. But if you want it, you'll find the time. So I believe a takeaway is similar to the takeaway we said before, but want to spend time with your spouse. Want to spend time with your kids. Want to spend time with your grandkids. And if you do want that, you'll find time. Rav Dov Yafa said that Rav Chaim's father, He believes that a big part of Rabbi Chaim's success was that of Kivud Avayim. And he goes and he says, Rabbi Chaim's father, the stipler, told him, don't waste time. Time is life. And he would really not waste time. He would, nothing. His father told, he was so into Kivud Avayim. I want to tell you an amazing story. Amazing story. So, Rabbi Kanievsky, which is the stipler, he was sitting and learning, and all of a sudden his daughter, Rabbi Barzam, came in, and she said, Abba Chaim, Rav Chaim is suffering from terrible back pains, which give him no peace. Perhaps, maybe the father has an idea that maybe could help. Now, the stipler was known for his deep understanding of human anatomy. He knew the human body very well. He was able to advise a lot in medical procedures and things like that. And he got this knowledge from intense study of halacha. And so he realized that, Rav Chaim is not feeling well. So he quickly got up and ran over to the house of his son, Rav Chaim. And Rav Chaim sees his father comes in. He's so surprised. So he's about to stand up in respect for his father. And his father says, no, don't stand up. Don't stand up. And he's the stipler's worried that it's going to add more to the pain. The stipler quickly runs and he goes to Rav Chaim and says, quickly lie down. Rav Chaim looking at him, he's like, okay. The father says, he lies down. He lies down and, Rav Stipler goes and starts massaging his back. And he's aligning the vertebrae, he's massaging the muscles, he's focusing on the pressure points. When he's finished, he goes to Rav Chaim and he says, make sure that you lie on your back with your knees bent for 3 hours. And then you turn to your side and straighten your legs for another 3 hours. Then the stipler goes to his son and says, Refuah Shalema, and returns to his studies. A few hours go by, and again, his daughter, Rabbi Barzam, comes in to the stipler. And he goes and, the stipler is thinking that she came in to say that Rav Chaim is feeling better and everything is okay. But to his surprise, she goes over to him and she says, perhaps Abba was too busy, but Rav Chaim is still waiting in unbearable pain. Maybe can the stipler come in and visit to see maybe he can help? So the stipler says, what do you mean? He says, right after you left, I ran over to Rav Chaim, gave him a massage, gave him instructions exactly to ease the pain. And, all of a sudden they realized that they were both talking about two different Rav Chaims. The stipler thought that she was talking about her brother, which was her son. But really what she was talking was about a different Rav Chaim, her son-in-law, Rav Chaim Kluft. So the stipler gets up, runs back to Rav Chaim Kluft. But now, if you think about it, you have one Rav Chaim sitting in pain and agony for hours. Another Rav Chaim got an unnecessary massage and without, any requests. And not only that, he didn't even correct his father. So Rav Chaim went to his daughter's son-in-law to go and now help the right Rav Chaim. And meanwhile, his daughter, the Rebbetzin, now went to Rav Chaim Kanievsky to apologize for the mix-up. So she goes into Rav Chaim Kanievsky's, this was already a few hours after, after the stipler came in, and she goes and she notices that Rav Chaim Kanievsky is laying down in the exact position that his father told him to. And she's like, what are you doing? She's like, Rav Chaim was completely healthy. He had no back pain. He had no issues. But his father came and told him, sit on your back, lie with your feet up over here, bend, do this and do that. He didn't ask any questions, didn't correct his father. Father said to do this, I'm going to do this. And he went, and he exactly what the father, this Rav Chaim has no time for nothing. Rav Chaim came and said, lay on your back, he laid on his back. The stipler came to Rav Chaim and said, lay on your back, he laid on his back. And he laid motionless. This is somebody who didn't waste a second. He laid motionless because this is what his father instructed him to do. You know why? Because the aspect of Kivud Avayim for Reb Chaim, it was a fact. It was independent of whether the instructions made sense or not. His father asked him to do something, so he's going to do it, whether he understands it or not. That's his level of Kivud Avayim. Reb Chaim would answer letters hundreds of letters a week. The way that he would answer it, he would prioritize. Kohanim would be answered first. Leviim would be answered second. The third group would be people that were named Yaakov Yisrael, because that was his father's name, and he saw it as kibbud av, to respond to people that were named after his father. And Rabbi Chaim goes and says, that if we pay attention, we'll see clearly that people who don't honor their parents suffer in this world. And he gives a bunch of examples, which we don't have time to get into, which I just realized now how much I'm over. But he did not, for him, whatever his father says, that's what he did. Rav Chaim, said that the Chazon Ish became the Chazon Ish because of his fulfillment of Kibbud Av V'Eim. Now, Rav Steinman added to that, of course, to become a Gadol Adar, it's not just, Kibbud Av V'Eim. You obviously have to toil very much, but there was a schus that came along with it, and that was Kibbud Av V'Eim. One of the hardest mitzvahs is Kibbud Av V'Eim. It's a difficult mitzvah. It's very difficult. And many of us think, okay, it's so hard, it's so difficult. So a lesson that we can take away is that, maybe you won't be able to do exactly to the level that Rabbi Chaim did, but something you can take out of it. Something you could. Maybe what you do is something very simple. Next time that your parent calls, you answer. Answer. Next time that your parent walks in the door, you stand up. Take something simple that you could work on Kibbud Av V'Eim. Now I have to think. Okay, so here's the question. I didn't realize how late it is. So the question is that if we're going to do another class on Rabbi Chaim, or I should do a few more minutes and then close it off. So we'll take a poll. The people that came to the Zoom are the ones that are going to be the one to decide. These are the two options. Do another class about Rabbi Chaim, because I didn't realize how late it was, or to do a few more minutes and then figure out something else for next week. Okay. Longer is not. Okay, another class looks like what it's coming in. Okay, so we'll neutral. Keep going. Okay. I'll tell you why I stopped. Keep going. I'll tell you why I stopped. We're going to do B'ezrat Hashem another class. I see that's where the consensus is. I've had people, ask me how come I don't look at the Torah Anytime camera as much, and I told them that I speak to people that are live, people that come to the shir. That's what I speak to. So you might not notice that, but I'm looking really at all the face. Well, there's only like a few people that are showing their face, but those are the people that I'm looking at. Those are I'm talking to the people over here live. So you are the guys that are going to go on. You're to decide if we have another class or not. So we came in with a consensus. Looks like we will have another class. So we'll stop over here. The reason also why I used to speak for a very, very, this was really before I started recording. I used to speak to, one class was never under an hour and a half. Like I used to speak a lot longer, especially my Friday nights classes. But I've had people that came over to me and they told, and they were right, where they told me that sometimes it's better to say less than say more, because people need to have time to process the information. Sometimes you have a 2-hour class, or a 3-hour class, or even an hour and a half class, and it becomes too, I don't know, there's too much information, and you end up leaving with, it's hard to leave with something. And the focus is, and we're giving these types of classes, or really any classes, that we should change ourselves. So sometimes when we're overloaded with information, sometimes we don't, get to change ourselves. So with that being said, let's do a quick recap and then we'll open up to questions. The first thing that we spoke about was Emunas Chachamim, and how important it is to have faith, to have a belief in the Gedolim of our generation. That when they say something, you take it to the bank. The second thing that we spoke about is Chesed, to make sure that you do one Chesed a day. The third thing that we spoke about is to make sure that you honor and you respect your spouse. The third thing that we spoke about is that make sure you spend time and to give attention to your children. And the final thing that we spoke about is regarding Kibbud Av V'Eim, to go and make sure that you respect your parents. And B'ezrat Hashem, take these things, try to put upon yourself just something. Do it le'ilei nishmas, Rav Chaim Kanievsky. But B'ezrat Hashem, we'll continue next week, and we'll try to, hopefully, I have to stop. The problem is that I have a week. And I end up learning more and reading more stories, and I keep on getting more and more information on it. So I have to really stop. The problem is that I just saw that Art School just put out another sefer about Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky and stories about that. So I don't know, maybe I should hold myself back and not buy it. I don't know. Whatever it is, the B'ezrat Hashem will continue with, I happen to think that these classes are very, very important, not only because we give kavod to the Sarah Torah, the Gadol Adar that we had, but equally as important, or perhaps maybe more important, it gives us an opportunity to help us grow and change ourselves. And that really is the focus of these classes. No one's asking you to be the, Rav Chaim Kanievsky, but what we're all asking is that try to change yourself a little bit with something. And with that, we will open up to questions. Okay. First question we have here is, what happens when the rabbis say different things? Then how do you know which to trust? Not talking about Rav Kanievsky. Okay, so this is a little bit of a different question. So when you're asking an halachic question, you have to make sure that you ask your Rav, your Pesach that you always deal with. It's never a good idea to go and ask multiple sources for the same question, because sometimes there are a little bit of leeways and they'll give different answers based on different ideas. The best thing that you should ask a rabbi that knows you, a rabbi that's fluent in particularly halacha. There's some rabbis that are not, their focus is not halacha, so make sure that you have somebody who's focused on halacha if you have an halachic question. If you have an ashkafa question, okay, so that broadens your ability. But you ask one rabbi, and that is the one that you're supposed to stick through with. If you want to ask different rabbis, the only way that should ever happen is if you ask your rabbi and then you have an opportunity to speak to a gadol. That's when you go. But other than that, it's not good to shop around to different rabbis. Okay, next question. Okay, I see over here, this class should have been for men and women. They could have learned a lot from Rabbi Chaim on how he should treat his wife. Whoever's married, send this to your husband to listen to. This is going to be online, but also this will be online for anybody to, B'ezrat Hashem, God willing. Hopefully the recording came out well, and it will go online on Torah Anytime and other sources as well. Okay, next question we have here. Okay, I just saw it over here now regarding refuah shalema for Yaakov Yisrael ben Tamar Malka. You should have a speedy and quick refuah shalema. Okay, next question. Can the Rav post this as soon as possible? I'd love to listen to this again and again. Yes, bli neder, I'll try to do it. I have to just edit it. Because I have the green screen, it takes time to edit it. So it usually, I can't just upload it right away. My computer is slow, so it takes time for it to edit it. Okay. Next question. Last week I asked a question on how people are saying that it is a sign that Mashiach is coming. But wouldn't Rav Chaim Kanievsky be worthy about being part of the generation of Mashiach? If we're supposed to believe Mashiach is coming today, why would Rav Chaim pass away just before Mashiach? Okay, so I actually remember this question, and thank you for bringing it down. I actually had it written down in my notes at the end of the class. The problem is we didn't get to the end of the class. So I have an answer. I have actually an answer regarding a little bit to branch out about the Mashiach topic, but we'll save that B'ezrat Hashem for next class. Hopefully we'll have time to speak about that. But I want to answer this question regarding, you have a gadol, you have a tzaddik, and if we know Mashiach is coming, then how come Rav Chaim Kanievsky wasn't part of that geula? So the simplest answer that I could give you is that we don't know the cheshbonos of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Like, why God had to take Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky away from us when we so desperately needed it, when we know Mashiach is coming. Why couldn't he stay alive until Mashiach comes? This is beyond our abilities to understand. This is the cheshbonos of Shemayim. This is we're delving into things that we can't begin to understand. But we have to understand a few things. That when you have a tzaddik, a gadol like this, there's a big kapara for the generation. There is a big, and this is something that I wanted to speak about, at the end of the class, but I didn't have a chance. But, you see that, Rav Chaim Kanievsky was nifter. A day after the Shiva, there was a terrorist attack in Bnei Brak. There's rarely terrorist attacks in Bnei Brak. 5 people passed away. Like, Rav Chaim Kanievsky had tremendous amount of protection, which I really wanted to speak about in depth. But, like, Rav Chaim Kanievsky had a tremendous amount of shmirah protection that he gave. And he passed away a day after. I don't want to get too much into it because I want to speak about it, B'ezrat Hashem next week. But we see that there's something missing about it. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu went and he took us away this amazing shmirah that we had, this amazing, protection that we had. Why is it that Reb Chaim is not staying until Mashiach comes? I don't know. There's no answer that I could give you of why didn't he go and he merited. But one thing is for sure, is that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu took away such a great tzaddik from us, it was only for us. Reb Chaim, was very much focused on Mashiach. He would tell people to come to Eretz Yisrael. He would tell people Mashiach. He was very, very much focused on the aspect of Mashiach. But perhaps this is in mention of Chazal that before Mashiach comes, I believe the Gemara in zt'l, the end of it, page 49, goes and mentions that says that Ein lanu amila lehisha'ein elo al avinu shebashamayim. Before Mashiach comes, we're not going to have anybody to rely on, only on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Maybe this is a fulfillment of that. Who knows? But the real answer is that we really don't know why Reb Chaim couldn't stay until Mashiach comes. Next question, is Emunas Chachamim only for your rabbis or for all rabbis? So that's a good question, and there's actually layers to that question, because in general, Emunas Chachamim means that when you go to somebody and ask for advice, you take that advice, you take that blessing. So it's your rabbi, or it's any rabbi that you go to. But if, let's say, a rabbi, if a gadol goes and says something, that goes across the board. But, there's a lot of different areas where different rabbanim are cholek on. There's a different opinions on. So that's a little bit differently, but that's really when you're dealing with an halachic question. But when you're dealing with brachas or things like that, that goes for all rabbis. Okay, and here we go. Thank you, Leah, for putting this out over here. The new Rabbi Kanievsky biography, and it's posted with the two gedolim, Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky and Rav Gershon Edelstein, the Rosh Yeshiva of Panovich. Okay, next question, and I would strongly recommend. I'm tempted to buy it, but I'm nervous that it's gonna extend the next class, but we'll see. Okay, next question. Regarding honoring parents, what can you do if your mother has a personality disorder? Okay, so this is a excellent question. And before I answer this question, I have to preface it with saying that this is something that you really need to speak personally to a rabbi, because it depends on the situation. Personality disorders is a very, very difficult disorder to live with. It's very hard for people to remain married to people with personality disorders. It's a very, very serious condition, and it's very, very difficult. With that being said, sometimes in relationships between parents and children, the right answer is to move away from home. The right answer is not to be home anymore. Sometimes it's an abusive relationship. Sometimes it's a difficult relationship. So sometimes the correct answer is not to be home. I'm not saying that a person needs to get abused and say, oh, this is what, kibbut avayim. No, really what needs to be done at this particular, in these things, is that you have to speak to a rabbi. You have to speak to a rabbi, and I've had numerous cases that came to me, and usually I even, I bring in a posik together with these types of cases and discussing what is the correct thing to do in these cases, and sometimes the answer was that the children should move out, and sometimes it was even to cut ties with the parents. So it really depends on the situation. If there is a mental disorder, that is something that has to be discussed with a rabbi, and it has to be with a competent, halachic authority, and to be, delve into each particular case. Okay, next question. I know this is probably a little bit of a sensitive topic, but I was visiting the Ol yesterday. I'm not Lubavitch, and everyone was ripping up their letters over the kever. Are you allowed to send a letter asking a rabbi for a bracha or for guidance after he passed away? Okay, so just a little bit of a background. So if anybody goes to the Lubavitch Rebbe's kever out in Queens, exit 22, if I'm not mistaken, 21, so, on the belt, there is a custom where there is, you write your bakashos, and you go to there, and you read your bakashas, and then you rip it up. The idea of ripping it up is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to answer your bakashas, and therefore, one of the things that you rip it up. But when you go over to daven at a kever, it is very important that you realize the idea behind it. So the idea behind it is that we are never, ever, 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 ever davening to the gadol, to the rebbe, to anything else. We're not davening because that's borderlining avodah zarah. We're davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the merit of the rebbe, the rabbi, the gadol, and in that merit of the gadol, please HaKadosh Baruch Hu answer us. And I was actually speaking about this to my brother-in-law, Rabbi Chaim Crone, actually a few days ago. And there's another aspect as well, is that you go and you don't daven to the gadol that's sitting in front of you, but you're asking the gadol to daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu on your behalf. So you're utilizing that aspect. So we're never ever davening to the deceased. We're davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it's either we're davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the merit of the tzaddik, or we're asking the tzaddik to daven on our behalf to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to go in front of Kisei HaKavod and plead on our behalf. So that is the aspect of writing it down and then going and ripping it up. That is a custom that they do. It's interesting. I heard that the first letter of each of the following words spelled out Mashiach, Maran, Shmaya, Yosef, Chaim. That's interesting. I never saw that. Heard that before. But obviously, the Gadol Adar passed away, so he's not Mashiach. Maybe he was, if we were a Zaychet, but at this point, he's not. What about when you're a Baal Tshuva and the only religious ones in the family? Okay, hold on a second. What about when you are a Baal Tshuva and the only religious one in the family at this time? I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. So if you could explain that. Okay, next question. If a married and mom has a personality disorder, and as much as I want to respect her, it's hard. It is a very difficult nisayon. It really is. I would recommend to speak to a rabbi, to consult, to figure out how to deal with it. Because sometimes people put themselves in a situation where they don't need to, and it causes them more harm. There's people that'll be like, okay, fine, I have to respect my mother, and in the end, they go and they try to respect the mother, then they have to go to therapy to fix it up, to whatever the damage was. So again, it's something that you really have to speak. It's something that you don't have to speak to me. There's some sort of rabbi that take it offline, really in dealing in particular things, because sometimes it is necessary to step away, and sometimes it's not. So it depends on the situation. Next question. Regarding honoring parents, what if a child is being fostered and not fully adopted, that the child has obligation to honor their foster parents? So that's a good question. I don't know where that falls into obligation of kibbud aim, but that definitely falls under the obligation of karas hatov. Hakaras hatov. There's, they're taking care of you, so there's definitely they're paying for your bills, they're putting a roof over your shoulder. That's definitely something that should be given kavod and honor, 100%, 100%. Okay, what about Igra? When the Chabad say to get an answer from the Rebbe, you need to say, okay, I'm sorry, that is cut off, or I don't follow that question fully, or maybe I don't understand that aspect fully regarding the Chabad custom. If you could please, just post it back in. Okay, next question. Why is it only borderline avodah zarah if a Messianic Jew or Lubavitch prays to the righteous Rebbe? Isn't it the same as Christians that use Yashka as a messenger to their prayer? Okay, yes. So let's try to delve on this not too long, because there is a lot to speak about it. But if somebody goes and prays to something else under the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then yes, that is problematic, and that is borderline avodah zarah. Why did I say borderline avodah zarah, not avodah zarah? Is because, first of all, nowadays, from my understanding, there's even in the Chabad sect, I don't believe there's a large group, if any, that actually pray to the Rebbe or do anything like that. There was a little bit of an issue at one point. I believe it was resolved to a majority of point. But the idea behind davening to somebody, there's a fine line where you daven to somebody and you say, "You help me," versus you ask the deceased to pray on your behalf. So there's a little bit of a fine line, and I believe that's really where the focus was, that they were davening to ask the Rebbe to daven on their behalf. And that's what my focus on the borderline was. Okay, next question. I heard 2 classes this week. I'm Sephardic. One Sephardic rabbi said if you live in an apartment building with both Jews and non-Jews living there, you cannot use the hot water directly from the faucet. The other Sephardic rabbi says you can. What is the halacha? Is it different for various groups? Okay, so this I don't even want to begin to delve in, but this is a big problem. I would say to reach out to a posek regarding this question, a Sephardi posek, to go and to delve in this. Regarding this, majority of the people will say not to use the hot water, but go and speak to a posek, because when you have 2 different rabbis say two different things and you already asked them, the best is to go to speak to a posek, and that will give you the final answer, and that's what you listen to. Okay. You should do an Ask the Rabbi session. Yeah. Sometimes it's funny because sometimes, every class, at the end of every class, I like to open up to Q&A. Some classes we have a lot of questions. Some classes we have no questions. So I don't know. To each, every class is different. Okay. Next question. What about? Okay. Again, we have here, when Chabad say to get an answer from the Rebbe, you need to say something like Ki Mashiach. Okay, I see we're delving into the Chabad world. So I am not a fan of the whole aspect of, the aspect of Rebbe and Mashiach, and, when people go and they say, I'm never going to mention it, whatever certain line that they say regarding the Rebbe was Mashiach, that is not, you don't need to get answered from the Rebbe to say, the Lubavitcher Rebbe was a very, very holy man. There is nothing that's associated that if you want to get an answer for him, you have to say that he's Mashiach, he's not Mashiach. I'm not going to get into that. The fact that people think that they say that the Rebbe is Mashiach is kfira. It's not kfira. It's not something that's kfira. However, it's not the general way that we understand and we, the Gedolim and the rabbis go and paskin regarding I shouldn't say paskin, but what the rabbis generally, agree upon. The Mashiach is going to be alive, but it's not considered the aspect of kfira. But nonetheless, if you want to go, the Rebbe was a huge tzaddik, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rav Menachem Mendel Schneerson, and you want to go and you daven by his kever, it's a huge thing. Daven by his kever, you don't have to say Melech, Mashiach or anything along those lines to get answered. You just daven in the merit of the schus of the tzaddik. Okay, what does it mean, an orphan generation? An orphan generation, one of the interpretations of it is that we are without leaders of the great that we had. Obviously, we have Gedolim and we have huge tzaddikim and rabbis, but, in the aspect of Rav Chaim, that we're orphaned in. We don't have that anymore. Okay, next question. Why is it different to go to a beach where people are dressed inappropriately as opposed to going to a pool with your friends who are all dressed the same way, example, camp? Okay, so the difference is, very quickly, the difference is that when you're going to a place where let's say it's a bunch of Jews or it's a bunch of women are dressed exactly the same, it's not so much of a problem. But when you're dressed with Goyim, and meaning that there are men and women, and the women are dressed a certain way, and they behave a certain way, and they act a certain way, that has a reflection on your, you see it, and subconsciously, this is something that you, it sticks in you. Like people that watch movies, or watch TV, or listen to all these gossip, or look at all these movie stars and how they dress, and how they wear, and how they walk, and how they talk, and all these things, it affects you. Whether you like it or not, it affects you and how you interact. So if it's a bunch of girls and it's in a closed place and it's in a modest environment, then it's no problem to do whatever it is that you're doing, because everything is done in a kosher aspect. But once you're dealing with men and women and things like that, it becomes problematic. It becomes problematic. Okay, there really is a lot to discuss about that, but let's try to wrap it up. Okay. Baal Tshuva question is about Kivat Avim. Can a deceased Rebbe still pray? Okay, so I don't understand the first part of the question, but the second part of the question is, let's say somebody who passed away. Can they still go and pray? Somebody who passed away is able to go and ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu on your behalf. This is an aspect of something called a Melitz Yosher. So we ask when someone passed away that they should be a Melitz Yosher. What's a Melitz Yosher? Somebody that goes and on the behalf and tries to go and bring good or something like that. Ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu, daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu from the Kisei HaKavod for his descendants, children, or people that do Chesed, on his behalf. Okay. Next question. You're referring to using water on Shabbos. Yes, I believe that. What was the question? Final question we have here. What if you take on chumras that your parents don't understand / agree with? Do you stick to it, or would you rather listen to your parents, which is a deraisa? So this question depends. It depends if you're dealing with something that is a minhag, a custom, but generally if you want to go l'chumrah and you want to take upon something upon yourself, and you're old enough to take upon something yourself, meaning that you're not a teenager anymore, you're older, you want to take upon something of yourself, and your parents say, why are you doing this, why not? You should listen to your parents in order to understand what it is, because they know you better than most likely you know yourself. But there's nothing wrong with going extra and being more machmir than your parents were, even if your parents said, what are you doing with this nonsense? You don't have to deal with this. This is extra. There's nothing wrong with taking upon yourself extra if you are on that level. Okay. But again, it really depends on, I really should mention this, that it depends on what you're dealing with. So if you have a particular question, you could ask it offline and we could delve in it, more on a direct Question. Okay, how could somebody honor abusive parents? That is a good question, and that depends on the situation. Sometimes the really what needs to be done is not to honor. I shouldn't say not to honor, but to stay away from abusive parents. But that's something that you have to speak with a rabbi, and it's a case by case situation. Okay, I don't know a Sephardi posik. Do you have a name? Yes, I would tell you to reach out to Rabbi Tahan, and if you don't have a way of reaching out to him, please reach out to me. And I will give you the contact information. I hope he doesn't mind mentioning it, or that you could go and reach out to him. Again, I'm going to put, and this is only that I do this on the Zoom classes, I put my cell phone on there. You could text me and I could give you the contact information for Friday posting. Okay, where are we over here? Yes.
I just wanted to address the swimming situation. I understand, you got to watch the atmosphere you're in. But if you Google Walmart.com or just Google modest swimwear, they even have swimwear that Muslims wear, and they're like burqas, but it's swimwear water resistant, material. But you can get full length, and you can get skirts that go down to your ankles. There's very modest swimwear, so that doesn't address being in the atmosphere. But if you and your Jewish friend are going to go to a private beach or something, and you want to dip your toes in the water, then there is swimwear that's available and affordable.
Shira, I thank you for mentioning that, because I really should put out a shout out to. So my brother works in clothing, and he has one of his. If anybody needs to know, it's a store in Brooklyn. It's called Basic Colors, and there's a website for it where he does sell. Part of his line that he does is he sells modest swim clothing, meaning that he takes material from bathing suits and he makes it into, you either have a 2-piece or a 1-piece, where it's a full length, because you can't go swimming in your regular clothes. So this is material that's made from bathing suit material that's full length. That's modest above your, I guess lower than your elbows, lower than your knees, and some of them come with like a different part of shorts under the skirt. There's a bunch of different aspects, to it. So you could definitely look it up, Basic Colors in Brooklyn, and you could also there is a website. I'm sorry, I don't know by heart. You search Google Basic Colors and you'll find it. And it's very interesting that he was mentioning to me. They says that there's a large Christian sect that also goes and buys from him. That they go, the non-Jews, that they go and they also have this modesty, and they buy this modest swimwear as well.
It's Aqua Modesta.
What was that?
Aqua Modesta.
Aqua Modesta. That's something else. I don't think that's his company, but maybe that's another company.
That's the original Jewish. That's the Tassan family. She was doing that for 20 years.
Oh yeah? Okay, fine. So yeah, it could be he was doing it more. What is he doing it now? He's doing it for maybe 15.
I think she sells to him.
Oh really? I think he maybe, I don't know. I'm pretty sure that he manufactures it himself, but maybe could be. But very cool, yeah. So there's definitely something out there that exists, and we see over here there's 2 options that you have, that you could go and have modest swimwear, and it becomes easier. Again, I'm not a woman, so I don't know dealing with this, like swimming with these types of material, but that does that does exist, and it is out there. Okay, next, it's the neshama of the person that is alive in Shemayim that's interceding on our behalf. So there's different parts of a neshama. There is a nefesh ruach. There's a nefesh ruach neshama chia and yechida. There's 5 parts to a neshama. So there's 3 parts in the body. The neshama is behind the brain, so to speak. The nefesh is in the liver, and the ruach is like in the heart area. But when a person passes away, all the parts of a person's soul goes up to Shemayim, but there's a small part of the nefesh, of the small soul, that's still in the grave. And again, it depends on the shiva, and again, it depends throughout the year. And on the yurt side, it comes down on the day that they died. It comes back again. That's why people have a custom to go to the graveside and pray during that time, because that's when the soul comes down, the day that they died. So there is an aspect that their soul is partially in this world, and also really majority in the next world, but there is some sort of a connection over there. That when you pray by a tzaddik, that you have an ability to go and he could ask to intercede on your behalf. Okay, next question. There we go. Thank you very much. We have already a link over here for basic colors. Okay, thank you very much. Is it avodah zara if you donate to do mitzvahs for the elevation of a soul, and based on this they will daven Shemayim on your behalf? No, not at all. If you go and you say, okay, fine, I'm donating le'ilei nishmas, Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, that in the schus of this, that Rabbi Chaim should intercede on my behalf, that's not a problem, not a problem at all. Okay, and here's the next one, aquamodessa.com. Thank you, Elliot, for putting that in there. Okay, next, another basic colors. Thank you. Basic colors. Okay. Good. Okay. Here we go. Okay, fine. Next question about the chumras. What if I'm a teenager? I shouldn't take on a chumrah that my parents don't agree with because my school is a lot starker than my family. Am I supposed to stay at the level of my family? Rather, no. That's a good question. It depends on what you're taking upon yourself. There's no requirement that you have to stay on your level of your family. Some people, their family is modern Orthodox and they are much firmer. There's no reason that you have to stay in that level, but it depends on what you're taking on. Majority of the cases, you are able to take on the chumras, but again, it depends on what it is. I was speaking about very obscure, like minhagim and things like that. But regular chumras sometimes are not chumras. Sometimes they're not stringencies. They're just actual halacha that the family doesn't take care of, and obviously you have required to do it. So again, this question is best to be asked in particulars and specific. You can reach out to me, or you could ask your local rabbi to go and guide you on it. Okay, next question. Oh, looks like the last question. Okay, there is. I don't know if it's a question. Okay, there is a newborn baby girl with Down syndrome for adoption. If anybody knows someone who's looking to adopt, please message me. Wow. Okay. Thank you for that. That's that's a huge thing. If anybody knows there's somebody up for adoption, I know people are trying to get adoption, and who knows how many long lines that they wait for. So there is that information there for whoever wants. Okay, next. Oh, we have one more. I understand that there is a concept of woman's intuition. If I meet someone, I have a bad feeling based on nothing. Should I take that into consideration, even if it will make me more likely to be less kind to them, or just to ignore it? So that's a good question. There is an intuition, and if you're dating somebody, I'm assuming that's what you're referring to. But if you're dating someone and there's something that just rubs you the wrong way, I wouldn't say to be less kind to them or ignore them, but don't ignore that intuition. Think, put it in the back seat and see if it actually comes into any fruition. If there's anything that comes into it that makes it realistic that you should look into it. Sometimes it's nothing, and sometimes it may be something. So it's not something I would say just ignore it, but it's not something that I would say that you should base your entire life decision on it. But okay, looks like that was the last and final question. I want to thank you all for joining. I want to also thank you all for putting in your votes for putting another class. B'ezrat Hashem, we'll do another class on our Chaim Kanievsky next week. And I really wanted to do something on Pesach, but the truth of the matter is that when a person's niftar, there's a lot that we need to tap in, and possibly, just possibly, this may be more important. Who am I to say? But maybe this is something that is important. So, B'ezrat Hashem, we will continue with this next week. Thank you all for joining. Have an amazing Shabbos, and have an amazing week. Until next week, have a great night.
Shabbat shalom.